Welcome, everybody, to the second hour of Mind Shifters Radio. Today is Tuesday, June the 7th, 2022, and our call-in number is 563-999-3581, and press 1, and that puts you into queue to talk to us. We'd love to hear your comments and questions because that makes this your show. And while we're waiting on Michael to get dialed in, excuse me just a second. Had to cough there. Didn't want to do that in your ear. A couple things have been added to the website. If you click on schedules or go down to events, either one, you will find a free 3-hour Why Is This Happening to Me Again workshop. If you click on that, you'll have all the information for how to sign in. Excuse me. It's going to be this Saturday from 2 to 5 o'clock. Now, yes, we are also having the monthly Mind Shifters meeting on Saturday, and that starts at 11. Pardon me. Take a drink and see if that helps any. Okay, so Saturday the 11th, we will have the Mind Shifters meeting. It starts at 11. It's a small group, and it usually only lasts 2 or 3 hours, so it should finish up prior to the 2 o'clock meeting. And that's going to be by Zoom, or if you join, there's a group on Facebook called the Marriage Support Group. It's run by a gentleman named Tim Kellis, and they are presenting Michael on Saturday to do a 3-hour Why Is This Happening to Me Again workshop. The flyer and all the information, how to get on the Zoom link, you can either go on Facebook and join the Marriage Support Group and watch the workshop on Facebook Live, or you can just use the Zoom link and join us on Zoom. So there's 2 ways that you can join us on Saturday, and we'd invite you to join us and be there. But that is under schedule. It's also under event. It's also under flyers and publicity. So there's several places that you can find all that information and get the link to the flyer. So that is new. You can look around on Why Is This Happening to Me Again. We've changed a few things, added a few things. I am in the process. I've spent about an hour with India this morning, and I'm scheduled to be with him again tomorrow. So we've made changes for the Android, and he will submit that to Google. And tomorrow we're going to make the changes on the iPhone and get that submitted to Apple. So those will be coming. It's just a few little glitches that weren't working, like for some reason the link to the Rose and the Butterfly story started going to an error page. So we've corrected that, and then there's just a couple other little things that we have worked on to fix. So put the app to work. If you find anything, drop me a line. It probably won't get in this edition, but if you find something that's not working in the app, drop me a line at Jeanie, Jeanie, at whyagain.org, and let me know, and we'll get it on the next go-round. Trying to keep it all up to date and keeping it operating and useful for you. And so I'm going to welcome Michael.
Thank you, dear heart. The technology process just never ends, does it? I mean, I can't count how many hours you put into getting that app to a place where it be functional. So, pretty awesome.
And I offer thanks to our technician in India, too. I mean, he's working from home because of the time difference. You know, when he's working with me at 10 o'clock in the morning, it's 9 o'clock at night for him. If I get up while he's at work, then I have to get up at 5 in the morning. So one or the other of us is working on our own time to try to get this done. And he's just super helpful, and I'm thankful for him as well.
For sure. And I'm thankful for the earth. I was just out before the show started watering the garden, and I don't know if you've looked, sweetie, but our plum tomatoes are about a little bigger than an inch around now, or long, and our Brussels sprouts are about a half inch in diameter. They've just popped overnight. Pretty cool. More food from the garden. Yay, start growing real food. Real food grows in soil, not dirt. Most of what you buy in the grocery store is grown in dirt. It's not real food. So just a little plug there for start a garden. And what's on my mind today, I was talking to someone yesterday who's been around this work for several years, and was going through a lot of symptoms. Actually, before I go into that, let me answer the question we have. Jeannie had given me a question that someone sent through the app. And thanks for the question, Phil. Does anyone know where to find the pronunciation, how to pronounce each beatitude in Aramaic, and what each word literally translates as? And first of all, on the literal idea, there are right brain languages and there are left brain languages. Left brain, it'd be like mathematics. Everything's precise, everything is exact and singular and boom, 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 boom. A equals B equals C equals D, whatever. Right brain language is not quite the same. The right brain is the intuitive side of the function of this mind. It functions differently than linear. So I would never say that you could take any word from the Aramaic language and say its meaning is literal, because there are nuances in the right brain approach that leave room for a very broad understanding of a word. And so if you're looking for literal, what does this letter by letter mean? You're not going to find it in the Aramaic language. It just isn't a literal left brain language. And if you open yourself to it, there will be insight and guidance that comes that's beyond anything the left brain could ever give you. That said, if you go to our website, whyagain.org, and you go to the products page, you'll see a book called Enlightenment. Enlightenment is a book that we've published from our translation work. 25 of the world's top Aramaists worked back in the early to mid-70s, working to establish the first century meaning of these Aramaic words. It was a very detailed process for doing that. In fact, the translation work was guided by a former partner, Dougal, who was an attorney. Bless his heart. He's passed now. Looking over at his picture right now, just inviting Dan to be with us and guide us. The right brain is what receives guidance as opposed to the left brain that wants its linear ideas. But as an attorney, he used the rules of evidence as put forward in the courtroom for determining the veracity of testimony. So everything that came in from the translator was kind of considered as testimony. And if it passed the rules of evidence, then it entered into the testimony. And then once the translator agreed on the meaning of a word, and Dan would send translations out to 25 translators, he'd get them back, and if there were conflicts, he would send it back out again and say, nope, something's not right with this. And so the translator would feed the information back. Does it match? No. Then it goes back out again. And just by way of a story that I, like to tell, and it was fun to be a part of, to Dan share this story. He had a gentleman in Chicago that he worked with who was what would be the equivalent. His name was Marsh Schumann, and he would be the equivalent of the Pope of the Church of the East, where the Roman pontiff is. Well, this guy would be the equivalent, and because of the conflicts in the Middle East, he ended up in Chicago. Dan used to describe Marsh Schumann as being older than God, and he would go and see him, and this gentleman who was older than God still drove around Chicago and apparently drove like a madman. Dan would lovingly tell stories about, his harrowing journeys through the streets of Chicago with Marsh Schumann. But there was one particular word they were having a problem with the translators. And there was one very well respected translator named Shapley. And Dan sent out to the translators the word neighbor and got back two different responses. most of the translators sent back a translation of the word neighbor is a mental word, not a physical word. But Shapley brought it forward as, this is the guy who lives down the block from you type of meaning. In contradiction of what everybody else was saying. So Dan describes going to see Marsh Schumann, on one of his trips to Chicago and bringing this word neighbor to him. And I can still see in my mind's eye Dan kind of mimicking Marsh Schumann as he waved off the idea of it being a physical word, that it was about the guy down the block, the physical neighbor, and he sort of waves his hand to mimic Marsh Schumann. He says, "Oh, I know what's got Shapley confused. He's reading those new dictionaries that they wrote in the 6th century." So Marsh Schumann's giving a correction. In its origins, the word neighbor is a mental word and, in fact, means anybody that you think about. Now, we're told that by the Greeks that we were told to love our neighbor as ourselves and love God, and that's totally and completely an errant translation. No such instruction was ever given. Actually, we were told to have a condition in our minds when we think of the Creator, when we think of neighbor. And that then means anybody that you think about, that you maintain a condition called Rachma in your mind. And Rachma, it turns out, and this is something we checked out. There's a community in California who are still native Aramaic speaking peoples. And I was out there. We were doing getting high resolution images made of the manuscript, and we went to visit with these folks. And they were, one of the questions we asked them was this word Rachma, and what they shared was that the actual meaning of the word had been lost to history. Nobody knew. So here's Yeshua saying, here is the most important thing, and nobody knows what the word means. What they did share was that their tradition said, although the meaning had been lost, that the most precious jewel, as in, a diamond or a ruby, it was the most precious jewel you could possess. So pretty important. Well, it turns out, as we worked with the translation, the word Rachma represents a filter in the frontal lobes of the brain that does two things. One, it's the gateway that brings human life, love, into the human mind. So what's most important to human life when they ask Yeshua? He answers, there is a filter in the frontal lobes of your brain that, when active, allows the entryway of your created essence love into your body-mind unit. And while that gateway is active, it will inhibit your mind from using any form of hostility or fear-based intentions as a resource for establishing the goals that drive perception in your mind. So, pretty important piece of information to have been lost. So, we need to have this condition in our minds so that we function as human beings, because if the alternative filters to Rachma, there are 3 filters over intentions in the frontal lobes of the brain. The alternative filters are hostility and fear. And hostility or fear serve up intentions keyed to negativity and destruction, where keyed to when Rachma is active, it serves up intentions keyed to love. Turns out, as we uncover these Aramaic gems, that goals are important because goals are the drivers for perception. And if goals are based in negativity or destruction, then perception is going to lead us to do hostile and destructive things. So if you want to keep a human life, you have to maintain this condition, this gateway open, Rachma, and active. So profoundly powerful. So when you come to understanding how these translation processes worked, then you really want to access the information directly. And what we have published so far from the Kaboris manuscript, and unfortunately, back in the 70s, the project ran out of money, and there's been no translation work done since. We don't know what we don't know from the manuscript, but what we have published so far is in a book called Enlightenment. You can order it from our product page on our website. The book's called Enlightenment. And the very question that you ask whenever somebody purchases that book, I always suggest that they sit down with a pen and paper and longhand translate the Beatitudes from Matthew 5 using the dictionary in the back of the book. So the way that the book is laid out is there are some select passages from the New Testament, and it's in a kind of the format of the King James Version, and the key words in Aramaic are left in brackets in that translation work. So you can take this key word and go back to the dictionary and longhand write out your own definitions. It's powerful. And I remember, and this goes back, 35 years ago, maybe more, that I took that project on of writing it out longhand using that dictionary. And it was the second time that I did it. I did it once, and I was like, oh, this is impactful. And then I did it again. It was a short time later. I was guided to do it again. And it was then that I realized that the Beatitudes are not what the Greeks taught us. They're not a nice philosophy. The Beatitudes are a set of instructions for achieving a certain state of mind. The first word in each of the Beatitudes, the Greeks tell us it's blessed are they, nothing to do with blessed are they. Although you can see when you understand the Aramaic how they made that leap. Not having the Aramaic brain cells, you can see how they made the leap to blessed are they, like there's some sort of external force that's going to bless you if you do something. But the word that they translated as blessed are they in Aramaic is tuvehun. Tuvehun is a three-part word, three different concepts in one word. A tuv is an attitude of mind or a neural structure, a structure in the mind. And the word tuvehun, more properly translated, would be a latent or an unconscious neural structure implanted in you by the Creator to guide you to happiness and well-being becomes your conscious possession. So this attitude of mind that's been relegated to the unconscious by our hostility and fear-based cultures will come back into activity if you follow the instructions in the Beatitudes. And the Beatitudes are a set of instructions for doing that. I suspect, seeing as how I'm speaking about this, Jeannie has probably already pasted in the links. We did actually almost a whole week of a conversation not long ago on the Beatitudes. There was a gentleman who had really picked up on that and from the work he did at Heartland really tapped in, a fellow named Mark, to the Beatitudes and spent time with them. And so we set up and had a series of radio shows where we talked about that. And so you can get a deeper listen to the Beatitudes by going to the archives, or I assume probably Jeannie's already got a link in the notes for today. So you can tap into and do that, but get a copy of the Enlightenment book. It's not a huge book, it's small, but there's a dictionary, there's an explanation about the manuscript, and then there are these select passages. Take them and start writing, put your pen to the paper, and watch how the right brain opens and how things that you can't say in English, part of your understanding. You go back to Yeshua 2,000 years ago, and Aramaic-speaking peoples asked him a question of his Aramaic mind, and he says, there's so many things I would say to you, but you can't hear them yet. In other words, you're stuck in your left brain, linear, you want A, B, C, D, E, and the universe doesn't work like A, B, C, D. Oh, it's precise, it's precision, but the creative function is from the right brain. And so as you start to develop the brain cells for that deeper level and you activate what Yeshua understood as and explained as a neural structure in you that was literally implanted to guide you to happiness and well-being. The guidance system is there. It's just been subverted in our hostility and fear-based world, and the Beatitudes explain how to reverse that so that the underlying energetic motion. If you talk to the psychologists today, they'll tell you that 90, perhaps 95, maybe as much as 98% of mental activity is unconscious. Why is that? Because for centuries we've been taught to live in denial and blame. You made me mad. And when we live in denial, we create this unconscious mind. We create this unnatural state of mind where our own mental processes are hidden from us. And when we come from unconscious mental processes, life gets crazy because of the unresolved hatreds and angers and rages and guilts and fears and traumas that overlie the guidance system that was designed for us. Now, as I say, it was the second time that I'm writing these out long, and it was just like, oh my God, this isn't a nice philosophy. This is a set of instructions for how to achieve a true human life, how to activate this neurostructure and realize that the guidance comes from within you. It's not out there somewhere. Much as Yeshua said, and this does come through in the Greek, if somebody tells you the kingdom is over there or over there or over there, believe them not, for it is here and it is now and it is within you. And by the way, the term, the community of heaven in Aramaic, is more properly translated as the community of love. Not someplace off in the sky, not some afterlife promise, but a place that you were designed to live here and now. You hear so many people who bought this Greek mythology garbage, and they're waiting to go off to heaven when they die. Of course, nobody comes back to say, that wasn't exactly it. But in the actual teachings of Yeshua, he's saying, there is a state that you can achieve here and now, and you can live in that state. It was called in the Beatitudes a heavenly estate. And it came from, the first beatitude. If we look at the Greek translations, it tells us that we're supposed to be poor in spirit. Now, Yeshua 2,000 years ago tells you that, you can even deny me, but don't deny that spirit that I'm here to connect you with. Connect with it. If you deny it, you're in trouble. And so now here we have the Greeks telling us that we're going to be blessed if we are poor in what Yeshua said he came to connect us with. How silly is that? How inside out, backward, upside down, and insane is that? And more properly translated, that passage would say, Tuvehun, a latent neurostructure implanted by the Creator to guide you to happiness and well-being becomes your conscious possession, you whose home is in the eternal forces from God, for yours is a heavenly estate. In other words, do you live in your mind? Do you live in your ABC linear left brain? To heal, you got to be out of your mind. Sooner or later, you got to be willing to be out of your mind. And that leads us right into what I was going to talk about earlier about the healing process. I was talking to someone yesterday who was experiencing, and if you start to do this work and you say to yourself, well, I haven't had a cold in 15 years. Well, if you haven't had a cold in 15 years, one of two things is true. You are on track and you're doing the right stuff and you are rocking. Or if you've been eating the sad diet and thinking the way of the hostility and fear-based mind, and your system is so shut down and suppressed that you couldn't process through energetic patterns that your structure's holding on to that don't belong there. People who are in that condition, when they start to do this work, start to experience all kinds of symptoms. And because we live in a culture that tells us symptoms are disease, people tend to get stuck in, oh my God, I have a disease. I better go find myself somebody to give me some pills to shut down this disease. It's interesting, there's an article just recently in the British Journal of Medicine, and this is a journal that's over 100 years old. It's one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world. Take a look at the article. And what they're saying is that this new thing called evidence-based medicine, by and large, in this culture, is a fraud. And it's a fraud. It's not accusing specific doctors who work in evidence-based medicine, but what they're acknowledging is that corporate interests and the way research money works and the way the pharmaceutical industry makes money from drugs, the whole system has become so dishonest and so fraught with fraud that you can't count on it anymore. And, look it up, British Journal of Medicine, evidence-based medicine. Put that in a search engine and read the article. It'll take you about 20 minutes. There's a good review of it. There's a fellow named Dr. John Campbell, who's actually a British nursing professor in a university in Britain. He does a lot of really good stuff. And if you put Campbell in that search engine, he does an explanation of this article. And it's just so enlightening to recognize that this pharmaceutical industry that we've been taught is, world-renowned and to be trusted. Do some research. And I don't have in my mind right offhand, I don't have the numbers, but, the top 5 pharmaceutical companies, if you look, each of them has been fined millions and millions and millions and more millions of dollars for fraud and criminal activity in promoting drugs, in marketing drugs, in developing drugs, in falsifying research. Millions of dollars. And the British Medical Journal is acknowledging that this is destroying medicine. Why do we live in a country that literally, if I remember the numbers correctly, we spend 60% more on disease care in this country than literally any one of the other, I think it's 38 developed countries that kind of work together as a group. We spend 60% more than any other country, and our outcomes, like infant mortality, something like number 35, maternal mortality is outrageous. The statistics, the disease statistics, we are so far down the ladder. We are behind countries you think of as primitive in terms of health outcomes. And the British Medical Journal is explaining exactly why that's true and why people need to take charge of their own health and become aware of what's going on, the fraud, the way that research is done only to produce drugs that they can hook people on for life and make an income, that they're not interested in healing. There's very little or no research that's done toward healing. It's all done toward treatment so we can hand somebody a pill that they'll buy from them for life. Each person, and I've said this for decades now, needs to learn to become their own healthcare provider. Primary healthcare provider. You've got to know what you need to do and be careful where you go, because the number 3 cause of death in America is medicine. The number 3 cause of death in America is properly prescribed medication. Put that word properly in brackets. It's just something, most people don't even suspect. When you start looking, it's important. So the danger of starting to do your work and recognizing that you're going to become symptomatic is when you become symptomatic that you run out and get a pill to shut down your symptoms. And the way that pills shut down symptoms is they weaken the system. They create a toxic load that stops the body from processing what needs to be processed. So if you're living the sad diet, if you've got hostility and fear going on and conflict in your relationships and financial difficulties and stress, and you haven't had a cold in 15 years, my offering is you're in deep doo-doo. You're in deep trouble. Because the structure, if it's vital enough, is designed to process out what doesn't belong. So be aware of that. And when you start to do this work, understand the healing process. I started this conversation out saying I had spoken with someone who was very symptomatic. They'd done this work for years, And as I quizzed them, what we established was she was not in the disease process. Yes, she had all kinds of symptoms going on, but what was happening was she had hit a new level of vitality and was processing what her body needed to process. So let's do a basic explanation of that. Let's imagine that we have a vitality meter. And the vitality meter goes from 1 to 10. If you're at a 1, man, you are low. It's like hard to get out of bed in the morning. If you're at a 10, you are rocking. You fly out of bed in the morning. You don't need caffeine. You don't need fixes. You don't need sugar. You don't need junk food. You are alive and vital. Your mind shoots on all cylinders. Your physiology goes, and you rock. Now, let's imagine that we've got somebody that's a level 10. But let's imagine we've got somebody that's a level 5 vitality. And they have a level 7 toxic load that they're carrying. Maybe it's a poison that they took on in childhood or, at some point. Maybe it's an emotional toxin, something that maybe has been going on for generations in the bloodline. Maybe it's a traumatic experience that somebody had as a child. But its toxicity level is 7. Now, here's what the structure does. Here's what the energy system does. If I'm at a level 5 vitality, I have a level 7 toxin, my body says my energy system says, I'm going to wall this off. I'm going to put some protection around it so that we can keep it in abeyance and it doesn't destroy us. Now, let's say, maybe that toxic load relates to rage. And somebody, notices they go through their lives and, I'm driving down the road and somebody does something stupid and here I am in a rage and somebody does this and somebody does that or I do something that's I consider silly and I start raging at myself, start telling myself how stupid I am or whatever. That level 7 toxin, somebody says, oh, I want to be through with that. I want to finish that. I want to get done with that. I want to get rid of that. Please, God, take that away from me. I want to be finished with it. But, excuse me, no, don't ask me to eat real food. No, I like my Mickey D's. I like my scotch in the evenings. I like my beer at lunch. You want me to eat actual food, like you want me to take like a strawberry from the garden and eat that rather than that strawberry jam that's half sugar and half hydrogenated fat, that one that I like? You want me to actually eat an almond rather than a peanut that's got toxic molds because it hasn't been handled properly and it was put in a jar with a ton of sugar and hydrogenated oils? And that's what I like to spread on my bread in the morning. You want me to eat actual almond butter, something that has actual natural oils and is actually nutrition for me? No, forget it. I want my sugar jam and my hydrogenated fat peanut butter. Well, you just locked your vitality down to a level where there are things your structure needs to process and it can't do it. So when you start to do this work, which means you're doing more of the right things, you're starting to look at your nutrition. You may be discarding that fifth of scotch every other evening, and you're replacing it with some water. You're starting to shift your dietary habits. You're working more in the arena of cultivating your relationship with love, of strengthening the awareness of yourself and the people around you as the presence of love. You're sitting down on a daily basis and you're doing a worksheet or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, and you're processing through those energetic patterns. And all of a sudden, as a result of doing that, you start building. You go from a level 5 vitality to a 6, and you start to get up in the morning and go, I really don't need that cup of coffee. I'm feeling pretty good. And I'm talking from experience here. I used to be in the restaurant business, and I used to do 2 pots of coffee a day. You couldn't stuff coffee down my throat for love nor money, and I haven't had a cup in, I don't know, I used to take a little sip off of Jeannie's when she drank it, and she hasn't drank it for years now. But I can remember a time when I couldn't drag myself out of bed without a cup of coffee. Artificial energy, toxic, deadly. Actually, do some research. I think it was ABC or NBC, one of the major news outlets. You can go to YouTube and just type in, I think it was ABC, reporter, coffee, and MRI. And there's a woman that goes to a doctor. She's a reporter, and they're doing a report on coffee. And she talks to the doctor. She's been instructed she doesn't have any coffee. And they do an MRI on her. And then they have her drink 1 cup of coffee, and they do another MRI. I mean, they're sitting there right then and there. And the doctor reads the second MRI, and guess what? The blood flow to her brain, he informs her, has been cut by a full 40%. That's 40% blood flow to the brain stopped from 1 cup of coffee in the morning. Now, I know there's research out there that says coffee's good for you and coffee does this for you and does, but excuse me, go read the article in the British Medical Journal and then go find out who financed those studies, quote unquote studies. 1 cup of coffee, 40% restriction, right there on the MRI. So if you start to drop those habits and strengthen, then you get to a level 7 vitality and you go, wow, I wake up in the morning, man, I feel so good. This is awesome. And then, maybe that day you do a particularly meaningful piece of work and you let go of a big one. Like there is a load off your back. You say, man, I feel like I just took a 10-ton weight off my shoulders. And now you're at a level 7.5 vitality. Remember that level 7 toxicity we talked about? When you hit that level 7, you go to bed that night and you feel so good. Man, I am rocking, flying high. You go to sleep. You get up in the morning and you wonder if anybody got the number of the Mack truck that went through your room during the night, because you are lower than a snake's belly. And I mean this quite literally. Physically, mentally, emotionally, you're in the pit. It's like, what the hell happened to me? I've been doing the right things. Yep, that's the reason this has happened to you. And you want that to happen to you. That is absolutely 1,000% desirable, because that level 7 toxin, wherever it's stored, if it's stored in your heart, guess what? 30 years down the road, it's probably going to show up as a heart attack. If it's stored in your brain, guess what? 30 years down the road, it's probably going to show up as a stroke. If it's stored in your blood marrow, guess what? It's probably going to show up as blood cancer. So sooner or later, you got to pay the piper. It's either going to come out as a disease or it's going to come out as symptoms. When you become symptomatic, when you recognize, when you understand the process and you recognize that you're in a symptomatic condition because you've hit a new level of vitality, and actually there are a couple of questions you ask yourself, 4 different things that will tell you when you become symptomatic. If you start doing this work and you become symptomatic, there are 4 questions to ask yourself to establish that these are symptoms in process. The first question you ask yourself is, 1, have I been doing more and more of the right things? Nutritionally, mentally, emotionally, relationship. 2, just before these symptoms hit, had I hit a new level of vitality? 3, what's happening with my elimination? In a disease process, there is a tendency for there to be a restriction in elimination. And we're talking about the output of all of the eliminative organs. We're talking about the bowel, the urinary tract, the skin, the mucous membranes, the sinuses, the lungs. There will tend to be an increase in the output when you go into a new level of vitality. And so, yeah, you could say, I haven't had a cold in 15 years, and all of a sudden I've got the quote-unquote flu. And, man, my lungs are just shooting all this stuff out every time I cough. Well, if you've been doing the right things, you're at a new level of vitality, your vitality's increased, and there's a 4th question we'll come up with. You are in hog heaven. You are on the high side of luck, because now your structure's vital enough to start to process out that load. And guess what? That last hawk of phlegm is liable to be what was going to be the beginning of the cancer cells in your lungs. So it's desirable to go into a healing process. The 4th question that will verify for you that you're in a healing process rather than a disease process is that you will find when you're under stress, you crave the drug that you use to shut down those symptoms initially. So let's say, for instance, we've got the fellow who, he's been on the wagon for 30 years. He's so proud. He got his chip just last night for his 30 years of sobriety. And he's so excited. He shares with everyone. All his friends are there applauding him and hooray, and all kinds of love being sent in his direction, a whole new level of vitality. And what happens? Boom, healing process. It opens, and he falls off the wagon. Why did he fall off the wagon? Because 30 years ago, when he would use a fifth of scotch to shut down whatever this pain was, he's now reached a level of vitality where he can reopen that. If he understands that his craving after 30 years for a shot of scotch that he hasn't touched in 30 years is coming from the fact that this old toxicity and this old alcohol habit energetically is now opening to be cleared out of his structure. He's freeing himself of that dis-ease energy, but if not in awareness, and there's that overwhelming craving for alcohol just like 30 years ago, that's when somebody falls off the wagon. Our whole culture is a drug culture, and I'm not talking even about the illegal or the legal drugs. I'm not talking about the insanity that now pot is going to become available to every young person coming up the tubes. Let's destroy their brains. We need to wake up to what we're doing to ourselves. In any event, just to remember those 4 questions. If I hit a new level of vitality, I've been doing the right things. My elimination is working, and I'm craving that old drug. I now know for sure that these symptoms are healing in process. And what I want to do is I want to lay on the cosmic grease. And cosmic grease is what I call willingness. I'm going to stand in the space of willingness to process through these energetic patterns that are not Dr. Feelgood, that are very traumatic. And it might go right back. I may have memories surface of things that happened to my great-great-grandfather. In fact, it might be a good idea to put the link in the notes today just for a demonstration of that, of the phone call. We were doing the Codependence to Interdependence Intensive online, and Magda called in and shared how, and she had done the responsibility communication in the context of the Codependence Intensive, and how that opened. We had given her an assignment. She was having some literally physiological challenges with her heart. And her assignment in the intensive was to start to inquire of her ancestors about the health of their hearts. And she called into the show and shared. And I know that when she shared it during the intensive, it left me in tears. And when she called back into the radio show and shared that she had a whole conversation that opened up with her grandfather who had passed, or it might have been her I think it was her grandfather. Anyway, and he shared how they had come over from Europe, were broke and starving in Europe, and thought they were coming to the land of milk and honey, and found themselves just as broke and starving. In fact, having to dig a hole in the ground and create a cave to have a place to live, and not knowing if the gardens were going to produce and if they'd have enough food for their kids, and how he raged and how he abused his wife and his children. And her conversation with him, it was just monumental, the resolution that took place and the power of her sharing that. And that's the kind of stuff that has to come up to be processed out of this energy system. Elsewise, it tends to create dis-ease processes in tissue that we call physical diseases. Now, my offering is there's no such thing as a physical disease. Now, most everybody would say, oh, come on, Michael, no, that's just a stupid thing to say. There's no physical disease. Well, maybe you know better than Einstein, but let's listen to Einstein and what he had to say on the topic. Here's what he said, quote, "On such things as matter, we have been all wrong. What we have heretofore called matter is energy, energy whose vibrations have been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses, there is no matter. If there is no matter, then there is no material disease. Our eye makes it look like matter, but in fact, if we could actually see when we look at what we call a body at another level of energy, another level of vibration, we know that radio waves exist. We can't see them. But if we could see on that level, we'd see that this whirring mass of electrons, protons, neutrons, and light, and this whirring energy system, if there were disintegrative energies in the energy system, then the energy system would be in a state of degeneration. And wherever that energy was stored, the organs involved would start to reflect as diseased organs. And their appearance would be distorted by the presence of the dis-ease energy in those particular cells and in those particular organs. Forgiveness, a la first century Aramaic, the tool that we're primarily here to share with you, is how to access on an energetic level those energy patterns that never belonged within your structure. How to process through them. And when you decide to step up and use the tools, and each time you hit a new level of vitality, there are going to be symptoms that will express on a physical, mental, and emotional level. Remember the willingness. Remember not to jump out and take a pill because you're symptomatic. Ask yourself first, have I been doing more of the right things? Had I hit a new level of vitality? Is my elimination working better? And am I craving those old drugs? If your answer is yes, then you're in a healing process. You're not in a disease process. And on a physical level, healing looks like any kind of physical symptom you've ever had and low energy. That's what healing looks like. On a mental level, healing looks like any kind of negative thought you've ever had and confusion. Yes, mass confusion is part of the healing process. On an emotional level, healing looks like any kind of negative feeling you've ever had and depression. And that's where you want to be aware, continue to utilize the tools, and continue to open your structure to throw off what does not belong and to reconnect and reestablish your relationship with yourself as the active presence of love, as your true nature. So as you start doing the work, it can kind of fall into the divine forgettery when you become symptomatic, especially if those symptoms are severe. And they can become, I promise you will never face anything inside of you that you didn't bring with you to the work. And whatever you did bring, whether it's 10 generations older, happened to you as a child or happened yesterday, energetically, as you bring forward conscious, active, present love, the focal point of this work, and you learn to collapse perception that gives you access to the underlying energetic patterns held in the tissue structure, then healing happens. Otherwise, it's all symptom treatment. Nobody has ever been cured by a drug. There is no person who gets headaches because their body lacks aspirin. Aspirin, by the way, is salicylic acid, comes from white willow bark tree. But you know, if you go and look, you'll find that there are hundreds of companies that make white willow bark herb from the white willow bark tree. But you know, there's one company that owns the word aspirin. What did they do? They took the white willow bark, salicylic acid, and I forget exactly the chemical bond, but they put an extra chemical in there to change it so it was no longer a natural molecule. It was now a man-made molecule, which meant it could be patented. And let me tell you that wars are fought over those patents. If you look at who was behind Hitler, there was a company called Bayer. Take a look. Do the research. That's who funded Hitler. You'll notice just recently, as a new president came into office, Bayer came into America. The same people that funded Hitler took over a company that made the most toxic chemicals of war that have ever been made on the planet. And guess what? That company now owns the majority of seeds patents on natural states of seeds on the planet. What do you suppose that's about if you start to get conscious of history and what's really going on in the world? It's time for us to wake up. Time for us to start to become aware. There's a very good interview by a gentleman named Rath, Dr. Rath. He's a German medical doctor. Put it in a search engine. Actually, go to YouTube. Type in Rath, Bayer, Hitler. He outlines it all. Guess what it was all about? It was about forcing other governments to honor patents so they could collect money for these unnatural molecules that they owned. And these companies that own these unnatural molecules, and every drug is an unnatural molecule. There is no body that's ever been short of any drug that's ever been sold. You can't call it a drug unless it's an unnatural molecule and you can patent it. Just something to be aware of. Now, I'm not saying there isn't a place for them, no question. If you got symptoms going on that are life-threatening, there's no question they can save a life. But there's a difference between saving a life and healing. Treatment? Yep, boy, they can just, the cat's meow. But my offering is any physician who does not offer healing along with treatment is guilty of malpractice. Yeah, if you need to do a treatment, have at it. But please do the healing work hand in hand with it if you really want to be healed and you really want to be whole. And ultimately, what you're going to need to bring the whole energy system into harmony is actual, real food that is grown in soil. There's an article I'm working on. Actually, it'll probably turn into a book called Healing from the Ground Up. If what you put in your mouth is not grown in soil, but rather is grown in dirt, you can't ever be healthy in the true sense of true human health. You can't grow food in dirt. And when you pour a gallon on every acre, or 10 gallons on every acre of glyphosate, and make sure everything in the soil is completely dead, you no longer have soil, you now have dirt. Food doesn't grow in dirt. That's why they have to use chemicals to make it look like food. Nutrition, the energy patterns that are needed to support this energy system are dead and gone. So, we kind of covered the whole gamut here. This is called holy in the ancient teachings. Holy didn't mean get down on your knees and fold your hands. It meant you had to understand and be responsible for every level of your life. What do you put in your mouth? Where does it come from? Do you have anything to do with the soil? Do you do the work of forgiveness? Do you have any comprehension what it means to live as the active presence of love, as a true human being? Do you have any comprehension of that? Or is it just like, well, I was told, go get a job, make money? What's it really mean to be a human being? You want to know? Hold a newborn child. Tap into the essence of the newborn. And when you get to the essence of the newborn, you'll notice that it's love. And you'll notice that the newborn isn't loving you. The newborn simply is the fact of love. It's who and what we are. And there's work to be done in order to get out of the generational patterns. You look at that story of the Jews wandering in the desert for 40 years. Do you think they were really lost in a 35 square mile area in a hot, sandy place and couldn't find their way out for 40 years? That's silly. But that word desert does represent a state that many people are lost in all their lives, and it's called unconsciousness. What had to happen to get out of the desert into what was called the Promised Land? What had to happen to get out of the desert? The state of creating the same things over and over and over again. There's a book about this. You can download it free from our website. It's called Why Is This Happening to Me Again? Because those who create unconsciously, who are stuck in their own unconscious, their own desert, simply play the game over and over and over, and it's always somebody else to blame. You want to move out of that into the Promised Land? What had to happen? They said the old generation had to die off. Look at those passages in the Scriptures. The old generation had to die off. Did that mean everybody in old physical bodies had to physically die? No. The root of the word generation is generate, means cause. I described to you a few minutes ago what Magda touched into as a cause for what the trauma was in her heart. Generations back. And was able to process that and move through it. We each must develop the skill of doing that if we want to truly live a true, full human life. And my offering is that's what we're here to do. So I hope that fits and makes sense. And we got a few minutes for questions, Gina. Do we have anybody out there in the phone queue with a hand up or anything happening in the chat room?
We do have a hand up. So it's 9:04.
Great,
You're on the
hello.
air. I think this is Dusty.
Well, aloha, everybody.
Aloha, young man. Welcome. Haven't heard your sweet voice in a while.
Yes, and I've been meaning to call you about a song, but that's another topic because I know we're close on time, but you used the word willingness repeatedly.
Yes,
and
cosmic
it's such
grace.
a powerful word. Because it implies, first of all, that there's intention and a motivation. I mean, that's what it's going to take.
Yes.
Because most of the time, the problem for any and all of us is that to do that and to upgrade our human potential or whatever it is, we have to leave our comfort zone.
Yeah, you have to get out of Satan, actually. In Aramaic, the word Satan means the resistor, one who misleads. It's not a dude with a red suit, tail, and pitchfork. The word Satan means the resistor. You know, you tell the average person that they're responsible for their rage, and they'll go, no, wait a minute. No, that's not true. This isn't my fault. Let me tell you about Charlie or Bill or Harry or Mary, and they'll give you their mislead. And that's exactly what Satan is in Aramaic, and most people are trapped there most of their lives.
Okay, that's good to know.
But the Greeks came along and made it into this dude that's out there. The problem's somewhere out there, of course.
Right.
And willingness to move inside and look inside is profound.
Oh, yes. And a bunch of, I would say the majority of people I run into, if they are even cognizant of that, avoid it at all costs. And because growth doesn't happen without, leaving your comfort zone and journeying into a brighter environment. And there's a word that I like, or a phrase in psychology, a cognitive dissonance, that if somebody has a cherished belief, I've got more money than you, or whatever it is, cherished belief that's very limiting, no matter how much they're presented with something else that's clear and documented and blah, 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 they won't believe it or accept it. In fact, I see people all the time just make up stuff out of whole cloth to avoid at all costs the truth.
Well, to avoid the truth and to be able to justify their belief in whatever their current reality is. If I need this piece, that piece of information to prove this to you, I'll just, as you say, I'll just make it up. Just make shit up. That's what people do in order to keep believing, to roll along the surface of belief rather than having to drop in and question themselves and confront whatever's inside.
Cheap way to go. And I would just say to anybody who is facing their demons at any level, if you go for it, you're in a way, I'm just going to use a phrase, a spiritual warrior. You're a warrior of growth, because it takes it takes a certain amount of, I don't know if I would use the word courage all the time, but it certainly takes a motivation.
Takes guts, for sure.
Yeah. And so when those discomfort levels hit, don't jump ship.
Willingness, cosmic grace.
Right. So
Right
that was
on, my
very
friend.
good. Yeah, and I love that whole monologue. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, we're down to the last minute or so, and Dusty, it's something about a piece of music. When we hang up, I'm going to dial you right back just to say hello. And everybody, thanks for joining us. Create the best year yet of your eternal life. It's an awesome gift to give the world. Blessings.